10 years ago, Dr. Sarah Chen was living what seemed like the perfect life. She was a brilliant cardiac surgeon at the top of her profession, saving lives and earning accolades. But in one devastating moment, everything changed. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live. The woman who had spent her career fixing broken hearts couldn't fix her own broken body. Facing her own mortality, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of spending her final months in chemotherapy chairs, she chose to volunteer at a children's hospice, thinking she could offer her medical expertise to families in crisis. What she found there was an 8-year-old boy named Marcus who would become her greatest teacher. This dying child, abandoned by his own family, would show Sarah something she'd never learned in all her years of medical training: how to truly live. What happened next defied every medical prediction and transformed not just Sarah's life, but the lives of countless children and families. If you're ready for a story about finding hope in the darkest places and discovering that sometimes our greatest challenges become our most beautiful purposes, then you're exactly where you need to be. But before we begin this incredible journey of transformation and healing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this will remind you that miracles happen when we choose love over fear. Chapter 1: The Diagnosis. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Martinez's office hummed with the same sterile efficiency that had defined Dr. Sarah Chen's life for the past 15 years. She sat across from her colleague, her hands folded neatly in her lap, maintaining the same composed demeanor she'd perfected during countless difficult conversations with patients' families. The irony wasn't lost on her that now she was on the other side of the desk, waiting to hear words that would shatter her carefully constructed world. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez began, his voice carrying the weight of friendship and professional obligation. "I've reviewed your scans 3 times. I've consulted with oncology, had second opinions from Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic." He paused, and Sarah could see him struggling with the words. "It's stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It's aggressive, and it's already metastasized to your liver and lymph nodes." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which Sarah realized with clinical detachment they essentially were. She'd seen enough terminal diagnoses to know what came next. The statistics, the treatment options, the timeline. Her medical mind was already calculating survival rates and treatment protocols even as her human heart began to crack. "How long?" she asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment. But Sarah, the chemotherapy would be brutal, and the quality of life. Dr. Martinez trailed off, knowing she understood the implications better than most. Sarah nodded slowly, her surgeon's training keeping her emotions in check even as her world collapsed around her. "Thank you for being honest with me, Roberto. I know this wasn't easy." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his eyes filled with the kind of compassion she'd seen him show to countless families over the years. "Sarah, you don't have to face this alone. There are support groups, counseling services, experimental treatments." "I need some time to process this," Sarah interrupted gently. "I'll be in touch about next steps." She stood up with the same grace she'd maintained throughout her career, shook Dr. Martinez's hand, and walked out of his office with her head held high. It wasn't until she reached her car in the hospital parking garage that the facade finally cracked. Sarah sat behind the wheel of her BMW, staring at the concrete wall in front of her, and for the first time in years, she had absolutely no idea what to do next. Her entire adult life had been a series of calculated moves, each one designed to advance her career, to save more lives, to become the best cardiac surgeon she could be. She'd sacrificed relationships, friendships, hobbies, and personal happiness all in service of her profession. And now, at 34, with more accolades and achievements than most doctors accumulated in a lifetime, she was going to die. The tears came then, hot and angry and filled with a grief she didn't know how to process. She grieved for the patients she wouldn't be able to save, for the surgeries she'd never perform, for the life she'd never really lived. She'd been so busy saving hearts that she'd forgotten she had one of her own. Her phone buzzed with a text from her surgical coordinator. "Dr. Chen, your 3 p.m. surgery has been moved to 4 p.m. Patient's family wants to speak with you first." Sarah stared at the message, realizing that in a few hours she'd be standing in an OR, holding someone's life in her hands, when her own life was slipping away. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. Instead, she started her car and drove back into the hospital, because that's what Dr. Sarah Chen did. She saved lives, even when she couldn't save her own. The next few weeks passed in a blur of medical consultations, second opinions, and treatment discussions. Sarah threw herself into research with the same intensity she'd brought to her surgical training, reading every paper, consulting with every expert, exploring every possible avenue. But the conclusion was always the same. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer was a death sentence with very few exceptions. Her colleagues began to notice changes in her behavior. She was more patient with residents, more gentle with families, more present in conversations. Dr. Williams, the chief of surgery, pulled her aside after a particularly complex procedure. "Sarah, you've been different lately. More human, if you don't mind me saying. Everything okay?" Sarah looked at her mentor, the man who'd shaped her into the surgeon she'd become, and felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her chest. "Just trying to remember why I became a doctor in the first place," she said, which was true enough. "Well, whatever's causing it, keep it up. The staff has noticed, and so have the patients. You've always been brilliant, but lately, you've been compassionate too." The comment stayed with Sarah as she made her rounds that evening. When had she stopped being compassionate? When had saving lives become just a job instead of a calling? She thought about the years of medical school, the grueling residency, the fellowship that had consumed her 20s. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of the idealistic young woman who'd wanted to heal people, not just fix their broken parts. That night, alone in her sterile apartment that looked more like a hotel room than a home, Sarah made a decision. If she only had 6 months to live, she wasn't going to spend them in chemotherapy chairs and hospital beds, fighting a battle she couldn't win. She was going to find a way to make those months matter. She thought about her conversation with Dr. Martinez, about the support groups and counseling services he'd mentioned. But Sarah didn't need support, she needed purpose. She needed to remember what it felt like to help people, not because it was her job, but because it was her calling. The idea came to her as she was looking through medical journals, searching for any new research that might offer hope. An article about pediatric palliative care caught her attention, not because of its medical content, but because of a quote from one of the doctors. "Working with terminally ill children has taught me more about living than any medical textbook ever could." Children. Sarah had always avoided pediatrics, finding it too emotionally challenging. She preferred the clean precision of adult cardiac surgery, where success was measured in technical skill rather than emotional connection. But now, facing her own mortality, she found herself drawn to the idea of working with young patients who were facing the same impossible situation she was. The next morning, Sarah called Sunshine Children's Hospice, a facility she'd heard about but never visited. She explained that she was a cardiac surgeon interested in volunteering her time and medical expertise during her sabbatical. The director, a warm woman named Linda Morrison, was thrilled to have such a distinguished physician offer her services. "Dr. Chen, we would be honored to have you here. Our children and families could benefit so much from your expertise. When would you like to start?" "Tomorrow," Sarah said without hesitation. "I'd like to start tomorrow." As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not the adrenaline rush of a challenging surgery or the satisfaction of a successful procedure, but genuine curiosity about what lay ahead. For the first time since her diagnosis, she was looking forward instead of backward. She spent the rest of the day arranging for a leave of absence from the hospital, citing personal reasons and promising to return when she was ready. Her colleagues were surprised but supportive, assuming she was finally taking the vacation she'd been putting off for years. If only they knew, Sarah thought as she cleaned out her office, that she wasn't planning a vacation. She was planning to learn how to live before she died. That evening, Sarah stood in her apartment, looking at the awards and accolades that lined her walls. Certificates of achievement, photos with medical luminaries, newspaper clippings about her groundbreaking surgeries. The evidence of a successful career, but not necessarily a successful life. She thought about the patients she'd saved over the years, the families she'd comforted, the lives she'd changed. But she also thought about the birthdays she'd missed, the relationships she'd neglected, the simple pleasures she'd postponed in favor of professional advancement. Tomorrow, she would begin a different kind of work. Tomorrow, she would start learning what it meant to truly live, even in the shadow of death. As she prepared for bed, Sarah caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked tired, older than her 34 years, worn down by the weight of her diagnosis and the relentless pace of her career. But there was something else in her reflection, something she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. Not hope for a cure or a miracle, but hope that her remaining time could be meaningful in ways her career had never been. Hope that she could learn to be more than just a brilliant surgeon. Hope that she could discover who Sarah Chen really was beneath the white coat and professional achievements. 6 months to live. It wasn't much time, but maybe it would be enough to finally start living. Chapter 2. Sunshine Children's Hospice. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Sunshine Children's Hospice as Sarah pulled into a visitor's space. The building was nothing like the sterile medical facilities she was accustomed to. Instead of institutional gray and white, the exterior was painted in warm yellows and soft blues, with a garden full of colorful flowers and a playground where she could see children playing despite their circumstances. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, watching a little girl with a bright pink headscarf push another child on a swing. Both children were laughing, their joy so pure and infectious that Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. How was it possible that children facing terminal illnesses could find such happiness in simple moments? Dr. Chen. A voice called out as Sarah approached the main entrance. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail was waiting for her. I'm Linda Morrison, the director. Welcome to Sunshine. Linda's handshake was warm and firm, and her smile reached her eyes in a way that immediately put Sarah at ease. Thank you for having me. I have to admit, I'm not sure exactly what I can offer here. Oh, I think you'll be surprised, Linda said, leading Sarah through the front doors. Our children and families face complex medical situations, and having someone with your expertise available for consultation and support is invaluable. But more than that, you'll find that our kids have a lot to teach you too. The interior of the hospice was unlike any medical facility Sarah had ever seen. The walls were covered with children's artwork, the floors were carpeted instead of tiled, and there were comfortable seating areas with books, games, and toys scattered about. It felt more like a home than a hospital, which Sarah supposed was exactly the point. We serve about 30 children at any given time, Linda explained as they walked through the main corridor. Some are residential, others come for day programs or respite care. Our philosophy is to focus on living, not dying. We want these children to experience as much joy, love, and normalcy as possible, for whatever time they have. They passed a music room where a teenager was playing guitar while several younger children sang along. In an art studio, kids were working on paintings with volunteers, their faces focused and serious as they created their masterpieces. Sarah was struck by how normal it all seemed, how the children appeared to be thriving despite their circumstances. This is our family room, Linda said, opening the door to a large, comfortable space with couches, a fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the garden. Families can stay here when they need to be close to their children, and we use it for group activities and celebrations. Celebrations? Sarah asked. Birthdays, holidays, achievements, we celebrate everything here. Last week we had a graduation party for one of our teenagers who finished high school through our education program. The week before that, we celebrated a little boy's first steps after his surgery. We find reasons to celebrate because joy is just as important as medical care. Sarah nodded, though the concept was foreign to her. In her world, celebrations were reserved for successful surgeries and medical breakthroughs. The idea of celebrating small moments and everyday achievements was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I'd like you to meet some of our children, Linda said, leading Sarah toward the residential wing. But first, let me give you some background on our approach. We believe in honesty appropriate to each child's age and understanding. We don't hide the reality of their situations, but we also don't let that reality define their experience here. They stopped outside a room decorated with space-themed artwork. Through the open door, Sarah could see a small boy sitting up in bed, reading a book about astronomy. He looked to be about 8 years old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that seemed too old for his young face. This is Marcus, Linda said softly. He's been with us for 3 months. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, very aggressive. He's been through multiple rounds of chemotherapy, but she didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood. Does he have family? Linda's expression grew sad. His parents couldn't handle the diagnosis. They signed over custody to the state and haven't been back since. Marcus doesn't talk about it much, but I know it hurts him more than the cancer does. Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest. The same anger she'd felt countless times when faced with families who couldn't cope with medical crises. But this time, the anger was mixed with something else. A deep, aching sadness for a little boy who was facing the end of his life without the people who should love him most. He's incredibly bright, Linda continued. Reads constantly, asks questions about everything. He's particularly fascinated by space and astronomy. I think he finds comfort in the idea that there's something bigger than his current situation. Can I meet him? Of course. Marcus, we have a visitor I'd like you to meet. The boy looked up from his book, and Sarah was struck by the intelligence in his eyes. Despite his obvious illness, the pale skin, the thin frame, the medical equipment nearby, there was a spark of curiosity and life that was unmistakable. Marcus, this is Dr. Chen. She's a surgeon who's going to be volunteering here for a while. What kind of surgeon? Marcus asked, his voice soft but clear. I operate on hearts, Sarah said, moving closer to his bed. I fix them when they're broken. Marcus considered this for a moment. Can you fix everything that's broken? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was a child asking the very question she'd been grappling with since her diagnosis. I wish I could, she said honestly. But some things are harder to fix than others. Like cancer. Sarah was surprised by his directness, but she appreciated it. Yes, like cancer. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to help people feel better and live as well as they can. Marcus nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense to him. Are you going to help people here feel better? I'm going to try. Is there anything I can help you with? Marcus held up his astronomy book. I'm reading about black holes, but some of the science is really hard to understand. Do you know about space? Sarah smiled, remembering her own fascination with astronomy as a child, before medical school had consumed all her interests. I used to love studying the stars. Would you like me to read with you sometime? For the first time since she'd entered the room, Marcus smiled, a genuine, bright expression that transformed his entire face. Really? You'd do that? I'd love to. As they left Marcus's room, Linda squeezed Sarah's arm gently. You're a natural at this. I can tell he already likes you. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. He's remarkable. How does he stay so positive? Children are resilient in ways that constantly amaze me, Linda said. They live in the present moment in a way that adults struggle to do. Marcus knows he's sick, but he doesn't let that stop him from being curious about the world, from finding joy in books and learning and human connection. They continued the tour, meeting other children and their families, learning about the various programs and services the hospice provided. Sarah was impressed by the comprehensive approach. Not just medical care, but emotional support, educational services, family counseling, and bereavement support. We believe in treating the whole child and the whole family, Linda explained. Illness affects everyone, and healing has to happen on multiple levels. By the end of the morning, Sarah's head was spinning with new information and perspectives. This was so different from the world she knew, where success was measured in surgical outcomes and medical statistics. Here, success seemed to be measured in moments of joy, in connections made, in the quality of time rather than the quantity. So, what do you think? Linda asked as they returned to her office. Are you ready to jump in? I think so, Sarah said, though she felt anything but ready. When would you like me to start? How about tomorrow? You could spend some time with Marcus, maybe help with some of our other children who have cardiac issues. And if you're comfortable with it, we'd love to have you participate in our family meetings and care planning sessions. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. That sounds perfect. As she drove home that afternoon, Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus and his question. Can you fix everything that's broken? She'd spent her entire career believing that she could, that with enough skill and determination, any medical problem could be solved. But now, facing her own unfixable condition, she was beginning to understand that healing might be about more than just medical intervention. Maybe healing was about connection, about finding meaning and joy even in the midst of suffering. Maybe it was about being present for someone else's journey, even when you couldn't change the destination. That evening, Sarah did something she hadn't done in years. She went to a bookstore. Not to buy medical journals or surgical texts, but to browse the astronomy section. She found herself drawn to books about space exploration, black holes, and the mysteries of the universe. Books that an 8-year-old boy might find fascinating. As she stood in the science section, holding a beautifully illustrated book about the cosmos, Sarah realized that for the first time since her diagnosis, she wasn't thinking about dying. She was thinking about living, about tomorrow, about sharing something beautiful with a child who needed someone to care. She bought 3 books about space, along with a star chart and a small telescope that the salesperson assured her was perfect for beginners. As she loaded her purchases into her car, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the store window. She looked different somehow, not healthier exactly, but more alive, more present. Maybe this was what Linda had meant about the children having something to teach her. Maybe Marcus had already started teaching her something important. That wonder and curiosity could exist alongside suffering. That joy could be found even in the darkest circumstances. 6 months to live. But maybe, Sarah thought as she drove home with her arms full of books about the stars, 6 months could be enough time to learn how to truly live. Chapter 3. The teacher becomes the student. Sarah arrived at Sunshine Children's Hospice the next morning with a bag full of astronomy books and a nervous energy she hadn't felt since her first day of medical school. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts about Marcus and the other children she'd met, wondering if she was making a mistake by stepping so far outside her comfort zone. Linda greeted her at the front desk with a warm smile and a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling about your first official day?" "Nervous," Sarah admitted. "I'm used to having all the answers, and I have a feeling that won't be the case here." "That's exactly the right attitude," Linda said with a laugh. "The moment you think you have all the answers when working with children is the moment you stop learning. They'll keep you humble, I promise." They walked through the familiar corridors, past the music room where a group of children were having a drum circle, past the art studio where yesterday's paintings were drying on easels. Sarah noticed details she'd missed the day before. Family photos taped to walls, handwritten notes of encouragement from volunteers, small shrines of personal belongings that made each space uniquely someone's own. "Marcus has been asking about you since yesterday," Linda said as they approached his room. "I think he's excited to have someone to share his passion for astronomy with." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety. What if she disappointed him? What if her rusty knowledge of astronomy wasn't enough to engage a clearly brilliant child? They found Marcus sitting by his window, the same astronomy book in his lap, but this time he was staring out at the sky with a wistful expression. When he saw Sarah, his face lit up with genuine excitement. "Dr. Chen, did you bring the books you promised?" Sarah held up her bag with a smile. "I brought several, and I have something else I think you might like." She pulled out the small telescope, and Marcus's eyes widened with wonder. "Is that real? Can we really look at stars with it?" "We can look at the moon and planets too, if the sky is clear enough. Would you like to try it tonight?" Marcus nodded eagerly, then his expression grew more serious. "But what if I'm too tired tonight? Sometimes the medicine makes me really sleepy." Sarah felt her heart clench at the matter-of-fact way he spoke about his limitations. "Then we'll try another night. Or during the day. Did you know you can sometimes see the moon during the day?" "Really? Really? And there are lots of other things we can explore with books and pictures until you're feeling up to using the telescope." Sarah settled into the chair beside Marcus's bed and opened one of the books she'd brought. It was filled with stunning photographs from the Hubble Space Telescope, images of distant galaxies and nebulae that looked more like abstract art than scientific documentation. "Wow," Marcus breathed, leaning closer to look at a picture of the Crab Nebula. "It's so beautiful. How far away is it?" "About 6,500 light-years," Sarah said, remembering the information from her reading the night before. "What's a light-year?" Sarah paused, realizing she needed to explain complex concepts in terms an 8-year-old could understand. "Well, light travels really, really fast, faster than anything else in the universe. A light-year is the distance light can travel in one whole year." Marcus frowned, clearly trying to process this. "So if something is 6,500 light-years away, that means the light from it took 6,500 years to reach us?" Sarah was impressed by his quick understanding. "Exactly. So when we look at this nebula, we're actually seeing what it looked like 6,500 years ago. So we're looking into the past? In a way, yes." Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying the image with intense concentration. "That's amazing. It's like time travel, but backwards." They spent the next hour looking through the books, with Marcus asking question after question about black holes, supernovas, and the possibility of life on other planets. Sarah found herself stretching her knowledge to its limits, sometimes having to admit she didn't know the answer to his questions. "I don't know," she said when Marcus asked about the theoretical physics behind wormholes. But we could look it up together, or maybe find someone who knows more about it than I do. You don't know everything? Marcus asked, but there was no disappointment in his voice, only curiosity. Nobody knows everything, Sarah said. That's what makes learning so exciting. There's always more to discover. Even doctors don't know everything? Sarah thought about her own recent experience with medical limitations, about the humbling reality of her diagnosis. Especially doctors. We're always learning new things, always trying to understand more about how the body works and how to help people feel better. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I like that. It means there's always hope that someone will figure out new things. The simple wisdom of his statement hit Sarah like a revelation. Here was a child facing a terminal illness, finding hope not in the promise of a cure, but in the endless possibility of discovery and learning. It was a perspective that had never occurred to her in all her years of medical training. Marcus, she said gently, can I ask you something? Sure. Aren't you scared? About being sick, I mean. Marcus considered the question seriously, his young face thoughtful. Sometimes. But being scared doesn't change anything, does it? I'm still sick whether I'm scared or not. So I try to think about other things instead. Like what? Like how cool it is that we're made of star stuff. Did you know that? All the elements in our bodies were made inside stars billions of years ago. So we're literally connected to the universe. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. This 8-year-old boy had just articulated something profound about the interconnectedness of all life. Something that put both his situation and hers into a cosmic perspective that was both humbling and comforting. That is pretty amazing, she said, her voice slightly hoarse with emotion. And even if my body stops working, those elements will go back into the universe and become part of something else. Maybe another star or a planet or even another person someday. So in a way, nothing really ends, it just changes into something different. Sarah stared at this remarkable child, wondering how someone so young could have such a mature and beautiful understanding of life and death. In all her years of medical training, she'd never heard mortality explained in such a hopeful, meaningful way. Where did you learn to think about things like that? She asked. Marcus shrugged. I read a lot, and I think a lot. When you're in bed a lot, you have time to think about big questions. They were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. A nurse named Jennifer peeked in with a warm smile. Sorry to interrupt, but it's time for Marcus's afternoon medication. Sarah started to get up, but Marcus caught her hand. Will you come back tomorrow? We could look at more pictures, and maybe you could tell me about what it's like to be a surgeon. I'd love to, Sarah said, squeezing his small hand gently. And maybe tomorrow evening we can try out that telescope if you're feeling up to it. As Sarah left Marcus's room, she felt a strange mixture of emotions. She was inspired by his wisdom and resilience, heartbroken by his situation, and somehow energized in a way she hadn't felt in years. This child was teaching her things about life and death that no medical textbook had ever covered. Linda was waiting for her in the hallway. How did it go? He's incredible, Sarah said, shaking her head in amazement. I came here thinking I was going to help him, but I think he's the one helping me. That happens a lot here, Linda said with a knowing smile. Our children have a way of putting things in perspective. They've faced the biggest questions about life and meaning at such young ages that they often have insights that take adults decades to develop. He talked about being made of star stuff, about how nothing really ends but just transforms into something else. I've never heard anyone explain death in such a beautiful way. Marcus is special, even among our remarkable kids. He's been through so much, but he's maintained this incredible sense of wonder about the world. I think having someone like you to share his interests with is going to mean a lot to him. As they walked back toward the main area of the hospice, Sarah found herself noticing things she'd missed before. The way the staff interacted with the children, not as patients, but as whole people with interests and personalities and dreams. The way the children supported each other, offering comfort and friendship despite their own struggles. In the family room, she saw a teenage girl reading to a younger boy, both of them bald from chemotherapy, but laughing at something in the story. In the garden, several children were working with a volunteer to plant flowers, their faces focused and happy as they dug in the soil. This place is remarkable, Sarah said to Linda. How do you do it? How do you maintain such a positive atmosphere when you're dealing with such difficult circumstances? We focus on living, not dying, Linda said simply. We celebrate every day, every small victory, every moment of joy. We don't pretend that death isn't a reality, but we don't let it overshadow the life that's happening right now. Sarah thought about her own response to her diagnosis, the fear, the anger, the sense of everything being over. She'd been so focused on the fact that she was dying that she'd forgotten she was still living. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said as they reached Linda's office. "Of course. Do you ever get attached to the children? Doesn't it break your heart when they die?" Linda finished gently. "Yes, it breaks my heart every single time. But Sarah, my heart breaks because it's been filled with love. These children teach us that love is worth the pain, that connection is worth the risk of loss." Sarah nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. "So you choose to love them anyway." "We choose to love them especially because of their circumstances, not in spite of them. They need to know they matter, that their lives have meaning, that they're worthy of love and attention and care. And in return, they teach us what it really means to be alive." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with one of the astronomy books open in her lap, but she wasn't reading. She was thinking about Marcus and his profound acceptance of his situation, his ability to find wonder and meaning even in the face of terminal illness. She thought about her own diagnosis and how differently she'd responded. Where Marcus found hope in the endless possibilities of discovery, she'd found only despair. Where he saw connection to the universe, she'd seen only isolation. Where he focused on the beauty of transformation, she'd focused only on the finality of ending. For the first time since learning about her cancer, Sarah began to wonder if there might be a different way to approach her remaining time. Not as a countdown to death, but as an opportunity to truly live, to connect, to love, to find meaning in ways she'd never allowed herself to explore. She picked up her phone and called her sister Emma, whom she hadn't spoken to in months. "Sarah, is everything okay? You never call." "I'm fine," Sarah said, then paused. "Actually, that's not true. I'm not fine, but I'm learning some things about what it means to be alive." "That sounds very philosophical for you. What's brought this on?" Sarah thought about how to explain without revealing her diagnosis. "I've been volunteering at a children's hospice. The kids there are teaching me things I never learned in medical school." "A hospice?" "Sarah, that sounds incredibly depressing." "That's what I thought too, but it's not. It's actually the most hopeful place I've ever been. These children are facing impossible situations, but they're still finding joy and wonder and meaning in their lives. They're teaching me that being alive is about more than just not dying." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay, Sarah? You sound different." "I'm changing," Sarah said honestly. "I'm learning that there's more to life than work and achievement and professional success. I'm learning about connection and love and what it means to really be present for another person." "Well, it sounds like this volunteer work is good for you. Maybe you should have done something like this years ago." After they hung up, Sarah realized that Emma was right. Maybe she should have done something like this years ago. Maybe if she had, she would have learned these lessons about living before she was faced with dying. But then again, maybe she wouldn't have been ready to learn them until now. Maybe it took facing her own mortality to open her heart to the wisdom that children like Marcus had to offer. She looked at the telescope sitting on her coffee table, imagining Marcus's excitement when they used it together. Tomorrow she would return to the hospice, not as Dr. Chen the accomplished surgeon, but as Sarah the student, ready to learn whatever lessons her young teacher had to offer. For the first time in weeks, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Chapter 4. Stargazing and Revelations. The next evening brought clear skies and a crescent moon that hung like a silver smile above Sunshine Children's Hospice. Sarah had spent the day with Marcus and several other children, reading stories, helping with art projects, and marveling at their resilience and wisdom. But she'd been looking forward to this moment all day, the chance to share the wonder of the night sky with a boy who found magic in the cosmos. Marcus was waiting by his window when Sarah arrived with the telescope, his face pressed against the glass as he watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Is it time?" he asked eagerly, his eyes bright with anticipation despite the fatigue that was clearly weighing on him. "It's time," Sarah confirmed, setting up the small telescope near his bed. "But first, we need to let our eyes adjust to the darkness. That way we'll be able to see more." She dimmed the lights in his room, and they sat together in the comfortable twilight, watching as more and more stars became visible through his window. "Tell me about being a surgeon," Marcus said quietly. "What's it like to fix people's hearts?" Sarah considered the question, thinking about how to explain the complexity of cardiac surgery to a child. "It's like being a mechanic for the most important engine in the human body. The heart is this amazing muscle that beats about 100,000 times every day, pumping blood to every part of your body. That's a lot of beating, Marcus observed. It is. And sometimes things go wrong. Arteries get blocked, valves don't work properly, the rhythm gets mixed up. My job is to go in and fix those problems so the heart can keep doing its job. Do you ever get scared? When you're operating on someone? Sarah was surprised by the question. Sometimes. Especially when it's a really complicated case, or when the patient is very sick. But I've trained for so many years that my hands know what to do even when my mind is worried. I get scared sometimes too, Marcus said softly. About the treatments, about what's going to happen to me. But then I think about the stars and how big the universe is, and it makes me feel less alone. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. You're not alone, Marcus. You have all the people here who care about you, and you have friends like me. I know. It's just, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have a mom or dad to talk to about being scared. The simple statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. Here was this remarkable child, facing the end of his life without the most basic comfort that every child deserved, the love and support of parents. She thought about her own parents, whom she'd barely spoken to in years, too busy with her career to maintain close relationships. I'm sorry you don't have that, Sarah said gently. But you know what? Sometimes families aren't just the people we're born to. Sometimes they're the people who choose to love us and be there for us. Marcus looked at her with those wise, serious eyes. Like you. The question caught Sarah off guard. Was she becoming like family to this child? The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. She'd spent her entire adult life avoiding deep emotional connections, focusing on professional relationships that were safe and predictable. But here was this 8-year-old boy, offering her something she'd never allowed herself to want. The chance to matter to someone in a way that had nothing to do with her medical skills. Like me, she said softly, surprised by how right the words felt. If you want. Marcus smiled, the first truly radiant smile she'd seen from him. I'd like that a lot. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the sky grow darker and the stars grow brighter. Finally, Sarah judged that their eyes had adjusted enough to begin their stargazing adventure. Ready to see the moon up close? She asked, positioning the telescope and adjusting the focus. Marcus nodded eagerly, and Sarah helped him look through the eyepiece. She watched his face as he saw the lunar surface for the first time through magnification, his expression shifting from curiosity to absolute wonder. Oh my gosh, he breathed. I can see the craters. And the mountains. It looks so real. Sarah smiled at his amazement. It is real. You're looking at another world, Marcus. A place where humans have actually walked. Really? People have been there. 12 astronauts walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972. They collected rocks, took pictures, and proved that humans could travel to other worlds. Marcus pulled back from the telescope, his eyes wide. Do you think people will go to other planets someday? Like Mars? I think it's very possible. There are already plans being made for missions to Mars. Maybe by the time you're grown up, space travel will be much more common. The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them, and she immediately regretted the casual reference to Marcus's future. But the boy didn't seem bothered by the implication. That would be so cool, he said simply. Even if I can't go myself, I like thinking about other people exploring the universe and discovering new things. His matter-of-fact acceptance of his limitations, combined with his genuine excitement for possibilities he might never see, left Sarah speechless. How had this child developed such grace in the face of impossible circumstances? They spent the next hour exploring the night sky together. Sarah showed Marcus how to find different constellations, and they took turns looking at Jupiter through the telescope, marveling at the planet's bands of color and its 4 largest moons. Those moons are named after characters from mythology, Sarah explained. Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. They were discovered by Galileo over 400 years ago. Galileo was the one who got in trouble for saying the Earth went around the sun, right? That's right. He was punished for challenging what people believed at the time, but he was right. Sometimes the truth is hard for people to accept. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Like how some people can't accept that kids can be sick and still be happy. The observation was so perceptive that Sarah had to take a moment to process it. What do you mean? Some of the volunteers who come here, they look at us like we're so sad and tragic. They want to fix us or make us feel better about being sick. But we're not sad all the time. We can be sick and still laugh and learn and have fun. Sarah thought about her own initial assumptions about the hospice, how she'd expected to find a place of despair and suffering. Instead, she'd found children who were living fully despite their circumstances, who had learned to separate their medical conditions from their capacity for joy. "You're absolutely right," she said. "I think I was one of those people when I first came here. I expected everyone to be sad and hopeless. But you're different now," Marcus observed. "You see us as regular kids who just happen to be sick, not as sick kids who can't be regular." The distinction was subtle but profound, and Sarah realized that Marcus had just articulated something important about how she'd changed over the past few days. She was beginning to see beyond the medical conditions to the whole people underneath. "You're very wise for 8 years old," she told him. "I think being sick makes you grow up faster," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "You have to think about big questions that most kids don't think about until they're older." "What kind of big questions?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. "Like what makes life worth living, and how to be brave when you're scared, and whether it's better to be sad about what you can't have or happy about what you do have." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "And what conclusions have you come to?" "I think life is worth living as long as you can find things that make you curious or happy or excited. And being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do things anyway even when you are scared. And it's definitely better to be happy about what you have, because being sad about what you can't have doesn't change anything." The simple wisdom of his words hit Sarah like a revelation. Here she'd been, wallowing in despair about her diagnosis, focusing on everything she was going to lose instead of appreciating what she still had. This 8-year-old boy was teaching her lessons about living that she'd never learned in all her years of education and professional success. "Marcus," she said gently, "can I tell you something?" "Sure." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to cross a line she'd never crossed with a patient before. "I'm sick too. Not the same kind of sick as you, but I have cancer." Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious but not shocked. "Is that why you came here? To learn how to be sick?" The question was so direct and perceptive that Sarah almost laughed. "I think maybe it is. I didn't realize it at first, but yes, I think I came here to learn how to be sick. Or maybe how to live while being sick." "Are you scared?" "Very scared," Sarah admitted. "I've spent my whole life trying to fix other people, and now I can't fix myself. I don't know how to be the patient instead of the doctor." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "It's hard at first. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "Being sick doesn't make you broken. It just makes you different. And different can still be good." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the profound truth of his words sank in. She'd been thinking of her cancer as a failure, a brokenness that negated all her professional accomplishments. But Marcus was right. Being sick didn't make her broken. It just made her different. And maybe different could still be good. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching over to squeeze his small hand. "Thank you for teaching me that." "You're welcome." "And Sarah?" "Yes. I'm glad you're sick." Sarah looked at him in surprise, and Marcus quickly clarified. "I mean, I'm not glad you have cancer. That's terrible. But I'm glad that being sick brought you here, because now I have someone who understands what it's like. And someone who can teach me about stars and hearts and all the amazing things in the universe." Sarah realized that Marcus had just articulated something she'd been struggling to understand. That even terrible circumstances could lead to beautiful connections. Her cancer had brought her to this place, to this remarkable child who was teaching her how to live. It didn't make the cancer good, but it made this moment, this relationship, this new understanding of what mattered in life, incredibly precious. They sat together in comfortable silence, looking out at the vast expanse of stars above them. Sarah thought about the cosmic perspective Marcus had shared earlier, how they were all made of star stuff, how nothing really ended but just transformed into something else. Maybe that was what was happening to her. Maybe her old life as Dr. Sarah Chen, the brilliant but emotionally distant surgeon, was ending. But maybe something new was being born. Sarah the friend, the surrogate family member, the person who could find meaning and connection even in the face of mortality. "Marcus," she said softly, "would it be okay if I came to see you every day? Not as your doctor, but as your friend." "I'd love that," Marcus said, his voice heavy with sleep but filled with contentment. "Will you bring more books about space?" "I'll bring whatever you want to learn about. We can explore the whole universe together, one book at a time." As Marcus drifted off to sleep, Sarah sat beside his bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, marveling at the peace on his young face. This child, who had every reason to be angry and bitter and afraid, had instead chosen curiosity and wonder and acceptance. She thought about her own response to her diagnosis, the fear and despair that had consumed her for weeks. But sitting here in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the hospice at night, she felt something shifting inside her. The fear was still there, but it was no longer the only thing she felt. For the first time since learning about her cancer, Sarah felt hope. Not hope for a cure or a miracle, but hope that her remaining time could be meaningful in ways she'd never imagined. Hope that she could learn to live with the same grace and wisdom that Marcus showed every day. Hope that being sick didn't have to mean being broken. As she quietly gathered up the telescope and books, Sarah made a promise to herself and to the sleeping child beside her. She would learn to live fully in whatever time she had left. She would choose curiosity over despair, connection over isolation, love over fear. She would learn to be different, and she would find a way to make different good. Chapter 5. The Experimental Treatment. 3 weeks into her time at Sunshine Children's Hospice, Sarah had fallen into a routine that felt more natural and fulfilling than any schedule she'd ever maintained. Her days were spent reading with Marcus, helping other children with their questions about medical procedures, and participating in the family meetings that were such an integral part of the hospice's approach to care. She'd grown particularly close to several of the children beyond Marcus. There was Emma, a 12-year-old with cystic fibrosis who had an infectious laugh and a talent for making everyone around her smile. There was David, a 16-year-old with brain cancer who was determined to finish his novel before his condition progressed further. And there was little Sophia, only 5 years old, who was battling a rare genetic disorder, but who greeted each day with the enthusiasm of someone who had never learned that life could be anything but wonderful. Each of these children had taught Sarah something different about resilience, about finding joy in small moments, about the importance of human connection. But it was Marcus who continued to be her greatest teacher, the one who challenged her assumptions about what it meant to live a meaningful life. On this particular morning, Sarah arrived at the hospice to find Marcus's room unusually quiet. He was lying in bed, paler than usual, with several monitors beeping softly around him. Linda was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand and speaking in low, comforting tones. "What's happening?" Sarah asked, her medical training immediately assessing the situation. "He had a rough night," Linda explained quietly. "His white cell count has dropped significantly, and he's been running a fever. Dr. Patterson is adjusting his medications, but—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood what the changes meant. Marcus was getting sicker, and his time was becoming more limited. "Is he awake?" "He drifts in and out. But he's been asking for you." Sarah moved to Marcus's bedside, taking his small hand in hers. His eyes fluttered open at her touch, and despite his obvious discomfort, he managed a weak smile. "Sarah," he whispered. "I was hoping you'd come." "I'm here," she said gently. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. Really tired. But I wanted to ask you something." "What is it, sweetheart?" Marcus's voice was so soft she had to lean close to hear him. "If you could do anything in the whole world, what would it be?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "What do you mean? Like, if you weren't sick, if you could do anything at all, what would make you happiest?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. A few weeks ago, she would have said something about performing groundbreaking surgery or advancing her career. But now, looking at this brave little boy who was facing his mortality with such grace, her answer was different. "I think I'd want to help kids like you," she said honestly. "I'd want to find ways to make sick children feel better, not just medically but emotionally. I'd want to help them feel loved and valued and important." Marcus smiled, his eyes brightening slightly. "You're already doing that. But I could do more. I could learn more about pediatric care, about working with families, about all the things that make places like this so special." "Then why don't you?" The simple question hit Sarah like a revelation. Why didn't she? She'd been so focused on the fact that she was dying that she'd forgotten she was still living. She still had time, still had the ability to make choices about how to spend that time. "You know what, Marcus? Maybe I will." Over the next few days, as Marcus's condition stabilized somewhat, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about their conversation. She began researching pediatric palliative care programs, reading about the specialized training required to work with terminally ill children and their families. She also found herself thinking about her own treatment options. She'd been so quick to dismiss the aggressive chemotherapy protocols that Dr. Martinez had suggested, so certain that she wanted to spend her remaining time in a meaningful way rather than fighting a battle she couldn't win. But what if fighting the battle was part of living meaningfully? What if trying the experimental treatments wasn't about denying her mortality, but about maximizing whatever time she had left? The turning point came on a Thursday evening when Marcus took a sudden turn for the worse. Sarah was reading to him when he began having difficulty breathing, his small body struggling against the progression of his disease. The medical team responded quickly, adjusting his oxygen and medications, but it was clear that he was entering a more critical phase of his illness. "I'm scared," Marcus whispered to Sarah as the nurses worked around him. "I don't want to die yet. There's still so much I want to learn about." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she held his hand, watching this remarkable child face his deepest fear with the same honesty he brought to everything else. "I know, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But you're going to fight, right? You're going to try the treatments." Sarah was surprised by his question. "What makes you ask that? Because if you don't fight, then who's going to teach other kids about the stars? Who's going to help them not be scared?" The logic was so simple and so profound that Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Marcus wasn't asking her to fight for herself. He was asking her to fight for all the other children who might need someone like her in the future. "You're right," she said, squeezing his hand gently. "I should fight. Not because I'm afraid of dying, but because there's still work I want to do." Marcus smiled weakly. "Good. And Sarah?" "Yes. Even if the treatments don't work, at least you'll know you tried everything. That's what being brave means, right? Trying everything, even when you're scared." That night, Sarah called Dr. Martinez from her apartment, her hands shaking as she dialed his number. "Roberto, it's Sarah. I've been thinking about the experimental treatment protocol you mentioned. Is it still an option?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, what's changed? Last time we talked, you were adamant about not pursuing aggressive treatment." "I've learned some things about what it means to really live," Sarah said. "And I've realized that fighting for more time isn't about denying death, it's about affirming life. The treatment is still experimental, and the side effects will be significant. There's no guarantee it will work. I understand, but I've met someone who's taught me that trying is more important than succeeding. That being brave means doing difficult things even when you're scared." Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. This someone must be pretty special. He's 8 years old and dying of leukemia, and he's the wisest person I've ever met. "When do you want to start?" "As soon as possible. But Roberto, I want to continue my volunteer work at the hospice during treatment. These children need me, and honestly, I need them too. We can work around your volunteer schedule." "Sarah, I'm proud of you for making this decision." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her apartment, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. The experimental treatment would be difficult, possibly brutal. There was no guarantee it would extend her life, and it might significantly impact the quality of her remaining time. But Marcus was right. Being brave meant trying everything, even when you were scared. And more than that, it meant fighting not just for yourself, but for the people who needed you to keep fighting. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the hospice to find Marcus sitting up in bed, looking slightly better than he had the day before. His face lit up when he saw her. "Did you call your doctor?" he asked immediately. "I did. I'm starting the experimental treatment next week." Marcus's smile was radiant. "I'm so proud of you. You're being really brave." "I learned from the best," Sarah said, settling into her usual chair beside his bed. "Now, what should we read about today?" "I want to learn about supernovas," Marcus said. "About how stars die and create new elements that become part of new stars and planets." Sarah opened one of their astronomy books, finding the section on stellar evolution and death. As she began to read about how massive stars end their lives in spectacular explosions that seed the universe with the building blocks of future worlds, she realized that Marcus had chosen the perfect metaphor for what they were both facing. "Listen to this," she said, reading from the book. "When a massive star dies in a supernova, it doesn't just disappear. The explosion spreads elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron throughout space. These elements eventually become part of new stars, new planets, and even new life forms." Marcus listened intently, his eyes bright with fascination. "So when stars die, they're actually giving birth to new possibilities." "Exactly. Astronomers call it stellar nucleosynthesis, the process by which dying stars create the elements that make life possible." "That's beautiful," Marcus said softly. "It means that even ending can be a kind of beginning." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized the profound truth in his observation. Maybe that's what they were both doing, not just dying but transforming into something new. Marcus was teaching her and countless others about courage and wisdom and the importance of living fully. And maybe if the treatment worked, she could transform her own experience into something that would help other children facing similar challenges. Marcus, she said gently, I want you to know that whatever happens with my treatment, I'm going to keep working with kids like you. I'm going to learn everything I can about pediatric palliative care, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have helping children and families through difficult situations. Really? You do that? You've taught me that my life has more meaning when I'm connected to people who need me. Not as a surgeon performing procedures, but as a person offering comfort and understanding and hope. Marcus reached over and took her hand. I think that's the most important kind of medicine there is. Over the next week, as Sarah prepared to begin her treatment, she threw herself into learning everything she could about pediatric palliative care. She read research papers, attended online seminars, and had long conversations with Linda about the philosophy and practices that made Sunshine Children's Hospice so effective. You know, Linda said during one of their discussions, we've been looking for a medical director with your background and experience. Someone who understands both the clinical and emotional aspects of caring for terminally ill children. Are you offering me a job? Sarah asked with a smile. I'm offering you a purpose, Linda replied. Whether your treatment works or not, whether you have 6 months or 60 years, there's a place for you here if you want it. The offer was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah had spent her entire career in the high-pressure world of cardiac surgery, where success was measured in technical precision and surgical outcomes. The idea of shifting to palliative care, where success was measured in comfort and connection and quality of life, represented a complete transformation of her professional identity. But it also felt like coming home. The day before her first treatment session, Sarah spent extra time with each of the children she'd grown close to. She read Emma a new chapter of her favorite book, helped David brainstorm plot points for his novel, and played dolls with little Sophia, who insisted that Sarah's doll needed to be a doctor who took care of sick children. But it was her time with Marcus that felt most significant. He was having a good day, alert and talkative, and they spent the afternoon looking through a new book about space exploration that Sarah had brought him. I've been thinking about what you said, Marcus told her as they looked at pictures of the Mars rovers. About how being sick doesn't make you broken, just different. What about it? I think maybe being sick has made me better in some ways. Like, I notice things more now. I appreciate things that I might have taken for granted before. And I think about big questions that most kids my age don't think about. Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I think you're right. My cancer has changed me too, but not all the changes have been bad. I'm more present now, more aware of what really matters. And you found your real purpose, Marcus added. You might never have discovered that you wanted to help kids like me if you hadn't gotten sick yourself. The observation was so perceptive that Sarah had to take a moment to process it. Marcus was right. Her cancer had led her to this place, to this work, to this understanding of what gave her life meaning. It didn't make the cancer good, but it made the journey meaningful in ways she never could have anticipated. You know what, Marcus? I think you might be the wisest person I've ever met. I learned from watching the stars, Marcus said with a grin. They teach you that everything is connected, that nothing happens in isolation. Maybe your cancer and my leukemia and us meeting each other. Maybe it's all part of some bigger pattern that we can't see yet. That evening, as Sarah prepared for her first chemotherapy session the next day, she thought about Marcus's words. Maybe there was a bigger pattern, a cosmic design that connected all their experiences in ways they couldn't fully understand. She thought about the supernova they'd read about earlier, how the death of one star created the elements necessary for new life. Maybe that's what was happening to both of them. Maybe their illnesses, as terrible as they were creating something new and beautiful. Deeper connections, greater wisdom, a more profound understanding of what it meant to be alive. Sarah fell asleep that night not with fear about the treatment ahead, but with gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this point. She was grateful for Marcus and his wisdom, for Linda and her compassion, for all the children at Sunshine who had taught her that living fully had nothing to do with how much time you had and everything to do with how you chose to spend it. Tomorrow, she would begin fighting for more time. Not because she was afraid of dying, but because she had finally learned how to live. Chapter 6: The Long Fight. The experimental treatment was everything Dr. Martinez had warned it would be and more. The chemotherapy cocktail was aggressive, designed to target the specific genetic markers of Sarah's cancer. But it came with side effects that left her feeling like her body was at war with itself. The nausea was constant and overwhelming. The fatigue was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Not just tiredness, but a bone-deep exhaustion that made even simple tasks feel monumental. Her hair began falling out in clumps, and her skin took on a grayish pallor that made her look as sick as she felt. But through it all, Sarah maintained her commitment to the children at Sunshine Children's Hospice. On days when she felt well enough, she would spend hours reading with Marcus, helping Emma with her art projects, and listening to David read chapters from his novel. On days when the treatment left her too weak to leave her apartment, she would call the children, maintaining their connections even when she couldn't be physically present. "You don't have to keep coming here," Linda told her after a particularly difficult week of treatment. "Everyone would understand if you needed to focus on your own health." "This is focusing on my health," Sarah replied, settling into her usual chair beside Marcus's bed. "These children give me strength in ways that no medicine ever could." It was true. Despite the physical toll of the treatment, Sarah found that her time at the hospice energized her in ways that defied medical explanation. The children's resilience inspired her own, their wisdom guided her through the darkest moments of her treatment, and their love gave her reasons to keep fighting when her body wanted to give up. Marcus, meanwhile, was experiencing his own ups and downs. Some days he was alert and curious, eager to learn about new topics and discuss the big questions that fascinated him. Other days, the progression of his leukemia left him weak and uncomfortable, struggling with pain and the side effects of his own treatments. But even on his worst days, Marcus maintained the grace and wisdom that had first drawn Sarah to him. He never complained about his situation, never expressed anger or bitterness about the unfairness of his circumstances. Instead, he continued to find wonder in small moments and meaning in his connections with others. "How do you do it?" Sarah asked him one afternoon when they were both having a particularly difficult day. She was dealing with severe nausea from her latest treatment, and Marcus was recovering from a painful procedure. "How do you stay so positive when everything is so hard?" Marcus considered the question seriously, as he always did. "I think it's because I know that being sad or angry won't change anything. I'm still going to be sick whether I'm happy or sad about it. So I choose to be happy about the things I can control, like learning new things and spending time with people I care about and making other people smile." "But don't you ever feel angry? Don't you ever think it's unfair that this is happening to you?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "But then I think about all the good things that have happened because I'm sick. Like meeting you and learning about the stars and having time to read all these amazing books. If I hadn't gotten sick, I might never have discovered how much I love astronomy." Sarah marveled at his ability to find silver linings in even the darkest circumstances. "You're teaching me how to do that too. How to find the good things that have come from being sick." "What good things have you found?" Sarah thought about the question. "Well, I never would have met you if I hadn't gotten cancer. I never would have discovered how much I love working with children. I never would have learned that there are more important things than professional success. See, even terrible things can lead to beautiful things." As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in her body. The nausea was still present, but less severe. The fatigue was still overwhelming, but more manageable. Most importantly, her latest scans showed that the tumors were shrinking. "It's working," Dr. Martinez told her during one of their regular checkups. "The experimental treatment is actually working. The tumors have shrunk by 30%, and your blood markers are improving." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with disbelief. "Does this mean I'm going to be okay?" "It means you're responding to treatment better than we dared to hope. We're not talking about a cure yet, but we're talking about significantly extended time. Possibly years instead of months." The news was overwhelming. Sarah had prepared herself for the possibility that the treatment wouldn't work, that she might have only a few more months to live. The idea that she might have years, that she might actually have a future to plan for, was almost too much to process. Her first instinct was to share the news with Marcus. She found him in the hospice's garden, sitting in his wheelchair and watching the birds at the feeder that the children had built with one of the volunteers. "Marcus, I have some news," she said, settling onto the bench beside his wheelchair. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news. Really good news. The treatment is working. The doctors think I might have years instead of months." Marcus's face lit up with genuine joy. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. But then his expression grew more thoughtful. Does this mean you won't need to come here anymore? Now that you're getting better? Sarah realized that Marcus was worried she would abandon him now that her own prognosis had improved. The thought broke her heart. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. I'm not going anywhere. Whether I have months or years, I want to spend that time here, with you and the other children. This place, these relationships, they've become the most important part of my life. Really? Even if you get completely better. Especially if I get completely better. Because that would mean I have more time to help kids like you, more time to learn about pediatric care, more time to make a difference in the lives of children and families who are facing impossible situations. Marcus smiled, but Sarah could see the sadness in his eyes. While her prognosis was improving, his was not. His leukemia continued to progress despite all the treatments his medical team had tried. I'm scared, Marcus admitted quietly. Not about dying exactly, but about not maturing. About being forgotten. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Marcus, you will never be forgotten. You've changed my life in ways you can't even imagine. You've taught me how to live, how to find meaning in suffering, how to choose hope over despair. Those lessons will stay with me forever, and I'll share them with every child and family I work with. Promise. I promise. And Marcus, I want to ask you something. Would it be okay if I wrote about you? About the things you've taught me? I think other people could learn from your wisdom. Marcus's eyes widened with surprise and pleasure. You'd really do that? I'd be honored to do that. Your story, your insights, your incredible courage, they deserve to be shared with the world. Over the next few weeks, as Sarah continued her treatment and Marcus's condition gradually worsened, they spent hours talking about life, death, meaning, and legacy. Marcus shared stories from his childhood before he got sick, talked about his dreams and fears, and continued to offer insights that amazed Sarah with their depth and wisdom. I've been thinking about what happens after, Marcus said one afternoon as they looked through a book about galaxies. After what? After I die. And I think I know what I want to happen. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she kept her voice steady. What do you want to happen? I want to become part of the stars, like we learned about with the supernovas. I want my atoms to go back into the universe and become part of something new and beautiful. Maybe a new star, or a planet where other kids can live and learn and discover amazing things. That's a beautiful way to think about it. And I want you to keep teaching kids about the stars. I want you to tell them that we're all connected to the universe, that we're all made of the same stuff as the stars and planets and galaxies. I will. I promise I will. Marcus smiled peacefully. Then I won't really be gone, will I? I'll be part of everything you teach, part of every child you help, part of all the love and wisdom you share. Sarah realized that Marcus had just articulated the most beautiful understanding of legacy she'd ever heard. He wasn't going to live on through monuments or achievements, but through the love and wisdom he'd shared, through the lives he'd touched, through the ripple effects of his courage and grace. You're going to live forever, she told him, meaning every word. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah's health continued to improve while Marcus's declined. The experimental treatment was exceeding all expectations. Her tumors had shrunk by more than 50%, and her doctors were beginning to use words like remission and long-term survival. But even as her own future brightened, Sarah found herself facing the impending loss of the child who had become like a son to her. Marcus was spending more time sleeping, his small body growing weaker as the leukemia progressed beyond what any treatment could control. I'm not afraid, he told Sarah one evening as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. I'm ready to become part of the stars. I love you, Marcus, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. You've been the greatest teacher I've ever had. I love you too, Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. Thank you for showing me the universe. Marcus died peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by the staff and volunteers who had become his family. Sarah was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and she felt something profound shift in the universe. Not an ending, but a transformation, just as he had always believed. At his memorial service, held in the hospice's garden under a sky full of stars, Sarah spoke about the boy who had taught her how to live while he was learning how to die. She talked about his wisdom, his courage, his incredible capacity for joy even in the face of terminal illness. Marcus believed that we're all made of star stuff, she said to the gathered crowd of children, families, and staff members. He believed that nothing really ends, but just transforms into something new and beautiful. And he was right. Marcus lives on in every lesson he taught us, in every moment of courage he inspired, in every child who will benefit from the wisdom he shared. As Sarah looked up at the stars that night, she made a promise to the boy who had saved her life by teaching her how to live it. She would dedicate whatever time she had left, whether it was years or decades, to helping other children facing impossible circumstances. She would share Marcus's wisdom, his courage, his understanding that being sick didn't make you broken, just different. And different, as Marcus had taught her, could still be very, very good. Chapter 7, A New Beginning. 2 years after Marcus's death, Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the newly renovated wing of Sunshine Children's Hospice, watching as construction workers put the finishing touches on what would soon be the Marcus Memorial Learning Center. The space was designed to be everything Marcus would have loved: a library filled with books about astronomy and science, a planetarium where children could explore the cosmos, and comfortable reading nooks where kids could curl up with volunteers to discover the wonders of the universe. Sarah's cancer had been in complete remission for 18 months. The experimental treatment had not only stopped the progression of her disease, but had eliminated it entirely. Her doctors called it a miracle, but Sarah knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was the result of fighting for something bigger than herself, of finding a reason to live that transcended her own mortality. Dr. Chen, a voice called from behind her. Sarah turned to see Emma, now 14 and cancer-free for over a year, approaching with a wide smile. "The kids are asking when you're going to start the first astronomy class." Sarah smiled back at the remarkable young woman who had become one of her closest friends and strongest advocates. Emma had not only survived her cystic fibrosis, but had thrived, becoming a peer counselor for newly diagnosed children and a passionate advocate for pediatric palliative care. "Tell them we'll start as soon as the telescope arrives," Sarah said. "It's a much bigger one than the little one Marcus and I used to use. We'll be able to see Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons in incredible detail." "He would have loved that," Emma said softly, and Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar bittersweet ache that came with memories of Marcus. "He would have. And you know what? I think he'd love knowing that other kids are going to discover the same wonder about the universe that he felt." The Marcus Memorial Learning Center was just one part of the transformation that had taken place at Sunshine Children's Hospice over the past 2 years. Sarah had officially joined the staff as medical director 6 months after Marcus's death, bringing her surgical expertise and her hard-won understanding of what it meant to face mortality with grace. Under her leadership, the hospice had expanded its programs to include not just end-of-life care, but also support for children with chronic illnesses, educational programs for families, and training for medical professionals who wanted to specialize in pediatric palliative care. "Dr. Chen, we're ready for the staff meeting," Linda called from the doorway. As the hospice had grown, Linda had been promoted to executive director, but she remained the heart and soul of the organization, the person who ensured that growth never came at the expense of the personal, family-like atmosphere that made Sunshine special. The staff meeting was held in the main conference room, which was decorated with artwork created by current and former patients. Sarah looked around the table at the faces of the people who had become her professional family: nurses, social workers, child life specialists, volunteers, and other medical professionals who had all chosen to dedicate their careers to helping children and families through the most difficult times of their lives. "Before we start with the regular agenda," Sarah said, "I want to share some exciting news. We've received approval for the research study we proposed last year." The room erupted in excited murmurs. For months, Sarah had been working with researchers from several major medical centers to design a study that would examine the long-term psychological and emotional outcomes for children who received comprehensive palliative care compared to those who received only traditional medical treatment. "The study will follow children and families for 5 years," Sarah continued, "tracking not just medical outcomes, but quality of life, emotional well-being, family functioning, and educational achievement. We're hoping to prove what we already know, that treating the whole child and the whole family leads to better outcomes across the board." "This could change everything," said Dr. Patricia Williams, the pediatric oncologist who had joined the team 6 months earlier. "If we can demonstrate the measurable benefits of comprehensive palliative care, it could influence policy and funding decisions nationwide." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly what we're hoping for. Marcus always believed that his experience could help other children, and this study is one way to make that happen. After the meeting, Sarah made her rounds through the hospice, checking on patients and families, consulting on difficult cases, and simply being present for children who needed someone to listen. It was work that challenged her in ways that cardiac surgery never had, requiring not just medical expertise but emotional intelligence, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to find hope in the midst of heartbreak. Her last stop was always the room that had once been Marcus's. It was now occupied by a 10-year-old girl named Lily who was battling a rare form of bone cancer. Like Marcus, Lily was incredibly bright and curious, though her interests ran more toward marine biology than astronomy. "Dr. Sarah," Lily called out when she saw her in the doorway. "I finished the book about octopuses that you brought me. Did you know they have 3 hearts and blue blood?" "I did know that," Sarah said, settling into the familiar chair beside the bed. "What else did you learn?" "They're incredibly smart. Some species can solve puzzles and use tools and even recognize individual humans. And they can change color and texture to camouflage themselves in amazing ways." Sarah listened as Lily enthusiastically shared her newfound knowledge, marveling at how children facing terminal illnesses often developed such intense curiosity about the natural world. It was as if they instinctively understood that learning about life in all its forms was a way of affirming their own existence, no matter how limited it might be. "Lily," Sarah said when the girl had finished her octopus lecture, "would you like to visit an aquarium sometime? I know a marine biologist who works at the city aquarium, and I think she'd love to meet someone as interested in ocean life as you are." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? We could do that. If you're feeling up to it and your parents agree, absolutely. Learning doesn't have to stop just because you're in the hospital." It was a philosophy that Sarah had learned from Marcus and that she now applied to every child in her care. Illness might limit their bodies, but it didn't have to limit their minds or their capacity for wonder and discovery. That evening, Sarah drove to the cemetery where Marcus was buried. She visited his grave regularly, not out of morbid fascination with death, but because she found peace in the quiet space and clarity in the conversations she had with his memory. "I think you'd be proud of what we're building," she said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside his headstone. "The Learning Center is almost finished, and we're going to help so many kids discover the same love of learning that you had." She told him about Lily and her fascination with octopuses, about the research study that might change how pediatric palliative care was practiced nationwide, about the new programs they were developing to support siblings and parents as well as patients. "I kept my promise," she said softly. "I'm sharing your wisdom with every child and family I meet. I'm teaching them that being sick doesn't make them broken, that they can still find joy and meaning and connection even in the hardest circumstances." As the sun set behind the trees, Sarah felt a familiar sense of peace settle over her. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this point, the devastating diagnosis that had seemed like an ending, the experimental treatment that had given her a second chance, and most importantly, the 8-year-old boy who had taught her how to live. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Emma, whom she now spoke to regularly. "How was your day?" "Still saving the world one child at a time." Sarah smiled as she typed back, "Learning from them mostly. They're the ones doing the saving." It was true. Every day, the children at Sunshine taught her something new about resilience, about finding joy in small moments, about the importance of human connection. They reminded her that life's value wasn't measured in years or achievements, but in the love shared and the wisdom gained along the way. As she drove home through the quiet streets of the city, Sarah thought about the future. Her cancer remained in remission, and her doctors were increasingly optimistic about her long-term prognosis. She might have decades ahead of her, decades to continue the work that Marcus had inspired her to begin. But even if her cancer returned, even if she only had months or years instead of decades, Sarah knew she would face whatever came with the same grace and wisdom that Marcus had shown her. She had learned that being alive wasn't about avoiding death. It was about embracing life fully, connecting deeply with others, and finding meaning in every moment. She had learned to live not in spite of her mortality, but because of it. Chapter 8: The Ripple Effect. 5 years after Marcus's death, the impact of his wisdom and Sarah's transformation had spread far beyond the walls of Sunshine Children's Hospice. The research study that Sarah had initiated had been completed and published in the New England Journal of Medicine, providing compelling evidence that comprehensive palliative care significantly improved outcomes for children with serious illnesses and their families. The study's findings had led to policy changes at the national level, with insurance companies beginning to cover palliative care services and medical schools incorporating pediatric palliative care into their required curricula. Sarah found herself traveling around the country, speaking at conferences and training programs, sharing not just the clinical data, but the human stories that had inspired the research. But it was on a crisp October morning, exactly 7 years after her original diagnosis, that Sarah experienced what she would later describe as the most meaningful moment of her career. She was in her office at Sunshine, reviewing applications for the new fellowship program they were launching, when Linda knocked on her door. "Sarah, there's someone here I'd like you to meet," Linda said, her voice carrying an unusual note of excitement. Sarah looked up to see a young man standing behind Linda, tall, lean, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that looked remarkably familiar. He appeared to be in his late teens, and there was something about his posture, his thoughtful expression, that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. "This is Michael," Linda said. "He's 18 years old, and he's starting college next month to study pediatric medicine. He wanted to meet you because, well, maybe you should tell her yourself, Michael." The young man stepped forward, his expression nervous but determined. "Dr. Chen, my name is Michael Rodriguez. I was a patient here 8 years ago when I was 10. I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and I wasn't expected to survive." Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. "Michael, you were here 8 years ago?" "Yes, ma'am. I was in the room next to a boy named Marcus. I remember you reading to him about astronomy, and I remember how kind you were to all of us kids. But what I remember most is something you said during one of the family meetings." Sarah's mind raced, trying to recall the details from that time period. She remembered several children who had been patients around the same time as Marcus, but the faces and names had blurred together over the years. "What did I say?" Michael's eyes grew bright with emotion. "You told my parents that even if I didn't survive, the time I had left could still be meaningful. You said that every day was an opportunity to learn something new, to connect with someone, to make a difference in the world, no matter how small." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the memory came flooding back. Michael had been one of the children whose prognosis had been particularly grim, and his parents had been struggling with despair and hopelessness. "You told them that I might not have a long life, but I could still have a full life," Michael continued. "And you were right. I went into remission 6 months later, and I've been cancer-free ever since. But more than that, you taught me that life isn't about how much time you have. It's about what you do with the time you're given." "Michael," Sarah whispered, standing up and moving around her desk. "I can't believe it's really you. You look so grown up." "I am grown up," he said with a smile that reminded her achingly of Marcus. "And I'm here because I want to do what you do. I want to help kids who are facing what I faced. I want to be the kind of doctor who sees the whole person, not just the disease." Sarah felt overwhelmed by emotion, joy at seeing this remarkable young man who had survived against all odds, pride in knowing that her work had influenced his life path, and a deep sense of connection to the continuing cycle of healing and hope. "Tell me about your plans," she said, gesturing for him to sit down. "I'm starting pre-med at the State University next month," Michael explained. "I've already been accepted into an accelerated program that will let me finish my undergraduate degree in 3 years. Then medical school, residency in pediatrics, and hopefully a fellowship in pediatric oncology or palliative care. That's a long road ahead of you." "I know, but I also know it's what I'm meant to do. Dr. Chen, you probably don't remember this, but you once told me that sometimes our biggest challenges become our greatest strengths. My cancer taught me things about resilience and hope and the importance of human connection that I never would have learned otherwise." Sarah did remember saying something like that, though she couldn't recall the specific conversation. It was a philosophy she developed during her own treatment, influenced by Marcus's wisdom about finding meaning in suffering. "I'd like to volunteer here while I'm in college," Michael continued. "I know I don't have medical training yet, but I think I could help in other ways. I could talk to newly diagnosed kids, help them understand that having cancer doesn't mean their lives are over." "Michael, I think that's a wonderful idea. We always need volunteers who can connect with our patients on a personal level." As they talked, Sarah learned more about Michael's journey. After his recovery, he'd thrown himself into his studies, graduating as valedictorian of his high school class. He'd also volunteered with various children's charities, always drawn to opportunities to help kids facing medical challenges. "There's something else," Michael said as their conversation was winding down. I've been working on a project for the past year, and I wanted to share it with you. He pulled out a thick folder and handed it to Sarah. It's a collection of stories from childhood cancer survivors. I've interviewed dozens of people who were treated for cancer as children, asking them about how the experience shaped their lives and what advice they would give to kids who are newly diagnosed. Sarah opened the folder and began reading the first story. It was beautifully written, capturing not just the medical details of the person's experience, but the emotional journey, the lessons learned, the ways that facing mortality at a young age had influenced their perspective on life. Michael, this is incredible. Have you thought about publishing this? That's the goal. I'm hoping it could be a resource for newly diagnosed children and their families. Something that shows them that cancer doesn't have to be the end of their story. It can be the beginning of a different kind of story. Sarah felt a familiar sense of awe at the wisdom and maturity of young people who had faced serious illness. Here was Michael, barely 18 years old, already thinking about how to use his experience to help others. I'd love to help you with this project, Sarah said. We could work together to get it published, maybe even develop it into a larger resource for families. Michael's face lit up with excitement. Really? You'd do that? Michael, 8 years ago, you were a scared 10-year-old boy facing a life-threatening illness. Now you're a young man who's dedicated his life to helping other children in similar situations. That transformation is exactly what this work is all about. Over the next few months, Sarah and Michael worked together on his book project, which they titled Still Here: Stories of Hope from Childhood Cancer Survivors. The book featured 25 stories from survivors ranging in age from teenagers to adults in their 60s, all sharing their experiences and insights about living with and beyond childhood cancer. But more than just working on the book, Sarah found herself becoming a mentor to Michael, helping him navigate the challenges of pre-med coursework while maintaining his volunteer commitments. She watched him interact with the children at Sunshine, marveling at his natural ability to connect with scared, sick kids and help them see beyond their immediate circumstances. He reminds me of someone, Linda observed one afternoon as they watched Michael reading to a group of younger children in the Marcus Memorial Learning Center. Marcus? Sarah asked. Yes, but also you. The way you were when you first started volunteering here. That combination of medical knowledge and genuine compassion, that ability to see the person beyond the patient. Sarah nodded, understanding what Linda meant. Michael had the same quality that had drawn her to Marcus. The ability to find meaning and purpose even in the midst of suffering, the wisdom to understand that challenges could become strengths. I think he's going to be an extraordinary doctor, Sarah said. I think he already is, in all the ways that matter most. The book was published the following spring, with proceeds going to support pediatric cancer research and family support programs. The launch event was held at Sunshine Children's Hospice, with many of the contributors in attendance along with current patients, families, and staff. As Sarah watched Michael speak to the gathered crowd about the importance of hope and resilience, she thought about the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. Her own cancer diagnosis, which had seemed like such a devastating ending 7 years earlier, had actually been the beginning of the most meaningful chapter of her life. Marcus's death, which had broken her heart, had also opened it to a deeper understanding of what it meant to live fully. And now Michael's survival and dedication to helping others was creating new ripples of hope and healing that would touch countless lives in the years to come. Dr. Chen. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. Sarah looked down to see Lily, now 13 and cancer-free for 2 years, tugging on her sleeve. Yes, sweetheart? I wanted to tell you something. I've decided what I want to be when I grow up. What's that? A marine biologist who also works with sick kids. I want to teach them about the ocean and all the amazing creatures in it, the way you taught Marcus about the stars. Sarah felt her heart swell with pride and joy. I think that's a perfect plan, Lily. The world needs more people who can share wonder and hope with children who need it most. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Sarah found herself standing in the Marcus Memorial Learning Center, surrounded by the books and telescopes and comfortable reading nooks that had been created in honor of the boy who had taught her how to live. Michael approached her, his face glowing with the satisfaction of a successful event. Thank you, he said simply. For everything. For seeing me as more than just a sick kid, for believing in my dreams, for helping me turn my experience into something that can help others. Thank you, Sarah replied, for reminding me that the work we do here doesn't end when a child leaves our care. It continues in every life they touch, every person they inspire, every act of kindness they perform because of what they learned during their time here. They stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the garden where Marcus had spent so many peaceful afternoons watching the birds and contemplating the mysteries of the universe. The space was now filled with memorial stones for children who had died, but also with living tributes, trees planted by survivors, flowers tended by families, benches where current patients could sit and find peace. "Dr. Chen," Michael said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever wonder what Marcus would think about all of this? The learning center, the research, the book, all the lives that have been changed because of the wisdom he shared." Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came whenever she thought about her young teacher. "I think he'd be amazed and proud, but not surprised. Marcus always believed that everything was connected, that every action created ripples that spread out in ways we couldn't always see." "I think he'd be especially proud of you," Michael said. "You took everything he taught you and used it to help thousands of other children and families." "We all did," Sarah corrected gently. "You, me, Emma, Lily, all the staff here, all the families who found strength in this place. We've all carried Marcus's wisdom forward in our own ways." As they prepared to leave, Sarah took one last look around the learning center. Tomorrow, it would be filled again with children exploring books about science and space, volunteers reading stories, families finding moments of peace and connection in the midst of medical chaos. The work would continue, as it always did, one child at a time, one family at a time, one moment of hope and healing at a time. Epilogue, 10 years later. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the podium of the International Conference on Pediatric Palliative Care, looking out at an audience of over 1,000 medical professionals from around the world. At 44, she was now considered one of the leading experts in her field, but she still felt the same sense of wonder and humility that had first drawn her to this work 10 years earlier. 10 years ago, she began, I was a cardiac surgeon who thought I knew everything about healing. I measured success in surgical outcomes and technical precision. I believed that my job was to fix what was broken, and that failure meant someone died on my watch. She paused, scanning the faces in the audience, doctors, nurses, social workers, chaplains, and other professionals who had dedicated their careers to caring for children with serious illnesses. Then I received a diagnosis that changed everything. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months to live. Suddenly, I was the one who was broken, the one who couldn't be fixed. And in my desperation to find meaning in my remaining time, I discovered a place that would teach me everything I thought I knew about healing was wrong. Sarah clicked to the first slide of her presentation, a photo of Marcus sitting by his window, reading one of his astronomy books, his face illuminated by curiosity and wonder despite his obvious illness. This is Marcus. He was 8 years old when I met him, dying of leukemia, abandoned by his parents, with no family except the staff and volunteers at Sunshine Children's Hospice. By every measure that I had been trained to use, Marcus was a failure, a case where medicine had failed, where healing was impossible. She clicked to the next slide, showing Marcus and herself looking through the small telescope, both of their faces filled with joy and discovery. But Marcus taught me that healing isn't always about curing disease. Sometimes it's about finding meaning in suffering, connection in isolation, hope in despair. Marcus was dying, but he was also living more fully than most people ever do. He was curious about the universe, grateful for small kindnesses, wise beyond his years, and generous with his love despite having every reason to be bitter and angry. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word as Sarah shared the story of her transformation from surgeon to palliative care physician, from someone who fought death to someone who helped others live fully in its shadow. Marcus died 3 years after I met him, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotion in her words. But his death wasn't a failure, it was a completion. He had lived a meaningful life, touched countless people with his wisdom, and left a legacy that continues to influence how we care for children with serious illnesses. She clicked through slides showing the Marcus Memorial Learning Center, the research studies that had grown out of their work, the policy changes that had improved care for children nationwide, and the dozens of young people like Michael who had been inspired to enter medicine because of their experiences as patients. The experimental treatment I received worked beyond anyone's expectations. My cancer has been in remission for 9 years now, and my doctors are cautiously optimistic about my long-term prognosis. But even if it hadn't worked, Even if I had died as originally predicted, those months with Marcus and the other children at Sunshine would have been the most meaningful of my life. Sarah's final slide was a photo taken just the week before. The current staff and patients of Sunshine Children's Hospice, now expanded to serve over 200 families annually, gathered in the garden for their annual celebration of life. Today, Sunshine Children's Hospice is a model for pediatric palliative care programs around the world. We've trained hundreds of medical professionals, influenced policy at the national level, and most importantly, we've helped thousands of children and families navigate the most difficult journeys of their lives with dignity, hope, and love. She paused, looking out at the audience one more time. But none of that would have happened without an 8-year-old boy who taught a dying surgeon how to live. Marcus showed me that our greatest teachers are often our youngest patients, that wisdom doesn't always come from textbooks and medical journals, and that the most important healing happens not in operating rooms, but in moments of human connection. As Sarah concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The terrifying diagnosis that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The child she had thought she was helping had actually been the one helping her. The career she had thought was over had transformed into something more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible. After the conference, Sarah returned to Sunshine Children's Hospice, where she found Michael, now Dr. Michael Rodriguez, completing his fellowship in pediatric palliative care. He had just finished reading to a group of children in the Marcus Memorial Learning Center, and his face glowed with the same satisfaction and purpose that Sarah felt every day. "How was the conference?" he asked as they walked through the familiar corridors together. "Inspiring," Sarah replied. "There are so many people around the world doing this work now, so many children and families being helped because of what we've learned here." "Marcus would be proud," Michael said, echoing the sentiment that had become a touchstone for everyone who worked at Sunshine. "Yes, he would. But you know what I think would make him proudest?" "What?" "That we're still learning. That every child who comes through these doors teaches us something new about courage, about resilience, about what it means to be human." Marcus always said that the best part about learning was that there was always more to discover. They paused outside the room that had once been Marcus's, now occupied by a 7-year-old girl named Sophie who was battling a rare genetic disorder. Through the open door, they could see her working on a painting with one of the art therapy volunteers, her face focused and serious as she created something beautiful. "Dr. Sarah," Sophie called out when she saw them. "Come see what I'm painting." Sarah and Michael entered the room, and Sophie proudly showed them her artwork, a vibrant painting of the night sky, filled with stars and planets and swirling galaxies. "It's beautiful, Sophie," Sarah said, genuinely amazed by the child's artistic talent. "What inspired you to paint the stars?" "I heard about a boy named Marcus who used to live in this room," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "The nurses told me he loved astronomy and that he taught people that we're all made of star stuff. I wanted to paint the stars to say thank you to him for teaching everyone that being sick doesn't make you broken." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes as she realized that Marcus's wisdom was still spreading, still touching new lives, still inspiring hope and wonder in children who had never met him but who benefited from the legacy he had left behind. "I think Marcus would love your painting," Sarah told Sophie. "And I think he'd love knowing that his love of the stars is still inspiring other children to find beauty and wonder in the universe." As they left Sophie's room, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 10 years ago, she had been given 6 months to live. Instead, she had been given a new life, not just the physical gift of remission, but the spiritual gift of purpose, meaning, and connection. She had learned that healing wasn't always about curing disease, that living wasn't just about avoiding death, and that the most important lessons often came from the most unexpected teachers. She had discovered that love was stronger than fear, that hope could coexist with suffering, and that even in the face of terminal illness, life could be beautiful and meaningful and full of wonder. Most importantly, she had learned that some stories don't have endings, they just have new beginnings. Marcus's story lived on in every child who found courage in his example, every family who found hope in his wisdom, every medical professional who learned to see beyond disease to the whole person underneath. And Sarah's story, which had seemed to be ending with a cancer diagnosis 10 years earlier, was still being written, one day at a time, one child at a time, one moment of healing and hope at a time. As she walked through the halls of Sunshine Children's Hospice that evening, Sarah felt the same sense of gratitude and purpose that had sustained her through the darkest days of her illness and the brightest moments of her recovery. She was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, surrounded by the people who had taught her the most important lesson of all. That life isn't measured in years, but in the love we give and receive, the wisdom we share and gain, and the hope we kindle in others even when our own light seems to be fading. She's supposed to have been dead 10 years ago. Instead, she had found a reason to live, not just for herself, but for every child who needed someone to believe in their worth, their potential, their capacity for joy even in the midst of suffering. It was, Sarah realized as she turned off the lights in the Marcus Memorial Learning Center and headed home. The most beautiful reason to live she could have ever. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that hope can flourish even in the shadow of mortality, then you're part of our community now. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we have more incredible stories of resilience, transformation, and the extraordinary power of human connection coming your way. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to find your true purpose. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from what feels like the end. The end.